Good evening and a happy Friday to everybody out there in RO land. This is the RO Sports Show's College Football Frenzy Special. I'm your host, Matt Harrelson, alongside with me, Ross Regular, Russell Parker. And we're at the end of the show, man. Not this show, but the end of the college football show. And believe it or not, we're almost done with college football for this season.
Well, we're moving on from regular season play and now into bowl season. We're kind of, to me, I call this kind of like the high point of the season. And because now it's all going to go just down until we get into the playoffs.
Yeah.
That'll be on New Year's Day, I think it is.
Actually, the semifinals are on December 29th, so a couple of days before New Year's. They had originally started showing them on New Year's, and people were upset because they wanted to go out and party and not have to watch college football or be hungover the next day and watch college football.
My family was really upset with that, too, because I always chose football over hanging out with them on New Year's.
Well, being a Bama fan, you can do that.
It's kind of tough to do that, though, when the rest of your fans are all the rest of your family's all ACC fans and they have nobody representing them.
That is true. But let's take a look before we move forward at our Week 14 picks. And, of course, there were the Power 5 championships, so that were the 5 games that we picked. After it was all said and done, I picked up 6 points. You and Jeremy both picked up 7, which brings us to our final total as we currently sit. You have 75. I am right behind you with 74. Jeremy bringing up the rear with 71 points. But let's figure out how we got there. So, the first matchup was a week ago, last Friday night, the Pac-12 championship between Utah and Washington. Now, this was a chance for me to potentially pick up a game. I picked the Utes. You guys both took the Huskies, and they won in a barn burner, 10-3.
I was actually kind of impressed at how low scoring this game was.
Yeah.
I usually see the Pac-12 kind of more of a balanced team. All of them are a balanced team where they could play some good offense, play some good defense. I usually expect it to be around the 20s for their scores. But Washington obviously getting it done, and I said a couple weeks ago that Washington has two great football teams in their state, and Washington proved it with this win over Utah.
Yeah, and that got them 10 wins for the season. They finished the Pac-12 7-2. They currently sit number 11 in the final polls. Of course, all that's done now, and we'll get to that here momentarily. But Utah only scoring 3 points, that doesn't surprise me a whole lot. And I know that Utah has a really good defense, and so does Washington. But Washington only scoring 10 points in the game. That surprised me a little bit because you've got, as I've talked about so many times, 4-year starter under center Jake Browning. He only threw for 187 yards and 1 pick, so no touchdown score. And then their do-it-all back, Myles Gaskins, only had 71 yards on 23 carries. I'm not sure what that averages out to be, but that's just a lot of pounding to get a small amount of yards for college football. But Washington wins the Pac-12. Of course, it didn't make any difference. They're not moving on to the college football playoff. One team that is our next one up here, we're going to skip down to Alabama and Georgia because I got them second here on the list. Alabama coming in at number 1, Georgia coming in at number 4. And, it was like what we said about Michigan last week. All Georgia had to do was win, and they were up for a long time. So what happened?
They led pretty much the entire game, and I know Tua had a couple of picks. And in fact, the first one came in the first quarter. Blew my mind. I think that was the first time he's been picked off, at least as far as I can remember. Georgia just had a great game overall, and they played better than us for the first half. And I expect Alabama to come back in the second half. They're usually a second half team, but Georgia can also be as well. So I was I was actually sitting here in the new office watching this game on TV, and it's just and seeing how it transitioned to the second half. Bama was still just trying to keep themselves in there and just staying alive. Georgia made a terrible call, though. I think it was a 4th and 11 play, and they run it. And I don't know what Kirby Smart was thinking there.
He said, though, that he stood by the call after the game.
Yeah, I just don't understand what he expected out of it. I don't know if he expected – this is against Nick Saban, who understands fakes quite often. So
4th and 11 is tough to pick up, period.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Much less against that defense,
But, anyways, Alabama Tua, he actually got injured in the game, so Jalen Hurts had to come out there. Kind of like a come-around thing here with Jalen Hurts because last season he got taken out of the game and Tua came in and won championship. Well, this game, Jalen Hurts came in after Tua left out and won the game against Georgia. So Jalen just overall, getting overwhelming support from the Alabama nation right now.
Yeah, now Georgia loses, but that makes them 11-2 on the season, 7-1 in the SEC East. Still a really good season.
Oh, yes.
But let's talk about something else here for a second. So, as we mentioned, Tua got hurt. Jalen comes in, which is the reverse of what we saw last year in the national championship. Although Jalen didn't get hurt, but he was underperforming, so Saban made the move.
And you can make a case that Tua was underperforming Saturday night.
Looking back, though, a lot of people gave props to Jalen Hurts for sticking around, unlike Kelly Bryant, who we now know is moving on. He transferred once he lost his job and is moving on to Missouri.
Yeah.
But what does it say about Jalen that he stuck around and was a team player, and then the sports gods looked down on him and said, "You know what? You still got a chance to play," and he came through.
He did. I think I really respect his decision that he wanted to stay and play for the team. He wanted to get his degree in Alabama, of course, but he also wanted to finish out. He's been him and Tua behind the scenes of what you see on the field. Well, also on the field, but also behind the scenes, they both get along very, very well. Jalen coordinates very well with his team. He's always been a team player since he's been there. And there's been some doubters about him staying, and maybe he should have left and went on and got more playing time somewhere else. He very well could have done that.
Sure.
But he's got a lot of loyalty to the Tide. He obviously believes in what Nick Saban has to offer, and it's definitely paid off for him in the end.
It absolutely has. And I'm looking at the breakdown of this game. Georgia led for the first 3 quarters. Mm-hmm. And then looking here, Alabama scored 14 points in the fourth quarter to finally take the lead and then ultimately win it.
And I honestly think we probably would have lost that game if Tua would have stayed in.
Yeah, but I guess my next question for you is this a scenario of Georgia's just that good, or did they maybe expose Alabama a little bit?
I think they're just that good. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about these two being – both of them should have been in the top 4. Of course, Georgia's on the outside looking in. But I think Georgia's obviously a 2-loss team. But coming into it, they weren't on a loss. They lost to LSU, who Alabama beat later on, a couple weeks later. So I think Georgia is still a really top-tier team. Just that they just can't get past the West. They obviously swept the entire East Division.
Yeah.
East Division is not that strong in the SEC. But Georgia has – always played very well with Alabama. The past 2 games they've had each other prior to this game, it was also within a 1-possession game. So I think Georgia just always has Alabama's number.
And your prediction, you've now got 1 year behind you. You're on the clock 4 more years, but still think Georgia will eventually get a national championship?
Yes, and if they keep on their trend like they've been doing, they gotta get past Alabama. They can get past them, they'll win championships.
And do want to mention Jake Fromm, Georgia's outstanding quarterback, only a sophomore. He threw for 301 yards and 3 touchdowns against an Alabama defense that has a lot of NFL talent on it year after year. So I think the future, like you said, still bright in Georgia. Now, as I mentioned, Kelly Bryant, former Clemson Tiger quarterback, moving on to Missouri. But that brings us to the ACC championship. Number 2, Clemson coming in against Pitt, who was unranked, as they should have been. It shows you how weak that side of the ACC was. Pretty much went the same way we thought it would. We all 3 took Clemson, and Clemson won handily, 42-10. Yeah, well, I wish you would have. I told you should have took Pitt, man. Trevor Lawrence, the guy that took Kelly Bryant's job, not a great game. 118 yards, 2 touchdowns, but they just literally just ran right over Pitt, and of course, Pitt's offense not able to do anything against that vaulted Clemson defense, especially on the defensive line, where you've got 3 guys that are projected to go in the first round of the draft, and then Austin Bryant, who will probably be a second-round draft pick. So,
and you can even make a case that this game was being played in Charlotte. I'm sure you've seen a lot more purple and orange out there than you did blue and gold.
Yeah, geographically it's closer to Clemson than it is Pittsburgh, but
that's obviously not the biggest case for it, but I feel like that atmosphere does play a hand in it.
Right. So Clemson, of course, finishes the season 13-0, 8-0 in the ACC, similar to Bama, who's 13-0 overall, 8-0 in the SEC. Of course, they're 1-2. Before we get to that, though, let's finish up the Power 5 Conference Championship. So we got the Big 12, Texas against Oklahoma. It was a rematch of the Red River rivalry. This one ended kind of a shootout, but Oklahoma able to win by, 12 points, 39-27 over Texas. So what do you think about Oklahoma? I mean, Kyler Murray's a heck of a quarterback, right?
He is when he's playing against Big 12 teams. I see. I'm actually really excited to see this Alabama-Oklahoma matchup we're going to have in the playoffs. See how he does against a really well-rounded defense. But going back to the Texas game, they've redeemed their loss against them earlier in the season, and I think with that happening, you can kind of say they've offset it. So in a way, they're undefeated. Yeah. But I think they've got a strong outlook for them in the coming years.
And perhaps winning and getting that revenge is one of the things that was in the CFP committee's mind and helped get them into the top 4. Oklahoma finishes 12-1 overall, 8-1 in the Big 12. Of course, as we just said, that one loss coming to Texas. And then finally, of course, don't want to forget the Big 10. Northwestern coming in from that side. Of course, we talked all year. We figured that might be Wisconsin. Wasn't meant to be. But the team we thought probably going to be on the other side, if it wasn't Michigan, it would be Ohio State. And they won pretty big as well, 45-24. Dwayne Haskins killed it. Almost 500 yards and 5 touchdowns. So obviously they're able to score points. But before we get to Urban, Ohio State on the outside looking in, going towards the CFP. Do you think maybe they got the shaft a little bit?
I mean, they lost the game with 34 points left on the board by Northwest. Or they won the game with Northwestern giving them 34 points there. So, I think that's where the playoff committee looked at it at. But obviously, Ohio State wins the game. They came off a strong season overall. It's just that lingering loss for Purdue. And probably the way they played their championship game versus, Oklahoma probably play a big factor in that.
Yeah, I agree. If Ohio State would have lost to, not Michigan, but maybe lost to a Penn State or somebody of that caliber instead of Purdue, perhaps maybe they slide into the CFP. I don't know. But, when they lost to Purdue, they jumped all the way down to, I think it was 10th. And, until they beat Michigan, it was like they just sat there. UCF jumped them, and it was like, oh, man, they're not going to make it in. And, of course, as it turns out, they were on the outside looking in. So, but let's talk about Urban Meyer because I don't know about you, but this kind of caught me off guard. It kind of came out of left field. Of course, he announced on Tuesday, held a press conference, says that he is retiring after their Rose Bowl game against Washington. Offensive coordinator Ryan Day is going to take over, but what do you make of this?
Hasn't he retired before?
He did when he was at Florida due to health concerns, and it sounds like perhaps he has like a cyst on his brain and it's been giving him headaches. If that's the case, retire. But still, it still kind of seems out of the blue, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and it could even just be something that's coming back from what happened preseason with domestic violence case going on that was going on there with them. That could very well play into the hand of it. Maybe it was kind of a deal they worked out where, okay, we want you to stay for his final season, but we might want you to leave after this one because we don't really want that lingering on our
They don't want the heat.
Yeah.
So to speak. I don't know, though. I mean, Urban Meyer, to me, is in that upper echelon with Saban, with, guys like Harbaugh, I guess, Clemson's coach, Dabo. Mm-hmm. To where I think he is allowed a little bit of leniency. Now, yes, he should have come forward with that, his coach's domestic violence thing. But they suspended him for 3 games. Some would argue that wasn't enough. Some would say it was too much. But still, again, if it's health reasons, if it's about your health, fine. But if there is some underlying thing where maybe something else happened behind the scenes that we don't know about, that the administration does, if it's something along those lines perhaps. And I hate that, when something like this happens, at least my first thought is, ooh, what's the gossip? Like, what happened? But, that's the world we live in. So it makes you wonder what exactly happened there. But again,
or we could just be talking nonsense. It could really be health reasons.
Absolutely. But again, we saw something similar with this when he left Florida. And then, at the time, Florida had some NCAA violations hanging over their head. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I'm a little skeptical about this one because it's like, well, he did that and then he just comes back and goes to Ohio State scot-free and doesn't have to worry about it. Is perhaps something coming down the pipe with Ohio State that we don't know about yet? I don't know. But do you think maybe there's a chance Urban sits out for a couple of years again and then comes back? He's only 57 years old. That's young for coaching.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think this could be the last time we see him.
I mean, could he? I mean, I guess the question is, look, Ohio State's one of the blue bloods of college football. Could he find a job better than that? I don't know that he could until something like Saban retires or something along those
I
lines.
don't think he would even go there. I honestly think he'd probably go somewhere maybe on the West Coast, maybe like a USC or something like that.
Well, he started his career at Utah. Actually, technically, he started at Bowling Green, but he actually got his footing in the Power Five under Utah. Coached Alex Smith, and then of course moved on to Florida, and now has 3 national championships, 2 with the Gators and 1 with the Buckeyes. But on the flip of that, offensive coordinator Ryan Day is going to take over as interim. Do you think he sticks around, or is Ohio State too big for a small name like that?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to stick with him. I think they'll have to look for somebody. Now, granted, it's going to be very difficult to find one right now, so he might be there for a year for the head coach until they can find somebody who's going to be good enough for the Ohio State.
I disagree. Ryan Day will be the interim for this bowl game, and that's it. And Ohio State has the power to. There could be a coach, unless it's Nick Saban, Dabo, Harbaugh, a couple of those guys that I mentioned. I feel like any other coach in any other program is up for grabs. And
maybe about Gus Malzahn's contract.
And yes, would it be poor form for, let's say, Gus to say, well, Ohio State's open, I'm leaving y'all even though I'm under contract? Yes, it would be. But it's not unprecedented. Mm-hmm. It's happened before. And if you're a coach and you feel like you could take the next step from whatever program you're at to an Ohio State, I think you absolutely take that. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know who that would be. And I don't even want to try to speculate because we'll have to wait and see what jobs open up. Some have already been filled. But maybe Scotty Montgomery wants it. While we're talking about that, go ahead and mention that before we move on.
Yeah, so Mike Houston was announced, I believe it was Tuesday, they came out and had a press conference at East Carolina University that announced him as the new head coach. I was actually really surprised at how quickly they got him. I figured they would get a new athletic director before they come up with a coach. But anyways, this guy has actually come from James Madison University, who's a former national champion in Division II. And now he's going to be playing for East Carolina. He's actually been a high school coach in North Carolina. I think he's from the eastern part of North Carolina. So he's trying to bring a lot of that tradition back to ECU and trying to get the culture back to where it was. And I am actually, as personally as an ECU fan, I'm very excited and very optimistic that this guy's going to go pretty far with ECU, and I think they're going to have a much better season than they have in recent memory.
It sounds to me like this is exactly what ECU needs.
Oh, yes.
And this is what I was ranting about last week's show. I wish this is what North Carolina would have done instead of going and getting an older coach who's been there, done that in Mack Brown. I thought, we should go and find one of these young up-and-comers, and what better than somebody that's dominated at the the D2 level, but still he's dominated. James Madison's good year in and year out, and again, that's kind of what I had hoped North Carolina would have done now instead of handing the reins to Mack Brown, and then he hands the reins to one of his assistants 3 or 4 years from now. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so before we finish up, let's take a look at our locked-ins and upset alerts. So I had, it was kind of slim pickings this week, but I had Stanford over Cal. I got that right. Jeremy took Virginia Tech over Marshall. He got his right, and you took App State over Louisiana Lafayette in the Sun Belt?
Sun Belt Conference Championship. Go Mountaineers.
So we were all 3 correct on that one. Not so much on the upset alert. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
So you took ECU over NC State. How'd that turn out?
I'm pretty sure that one ended with ECU losing big time.
Yeah.
I don't remember the score. I think it was I like to forget that score, actually.
It was a lot to a little. We'll just say that. Jeremy took Akron over South Carolina. Again, kind of slim pickings. And after South Carolina put 35 up on Clemson, they just laid it on Akron.
And on the other hand.
And then finally, I took Memphis over UCF. Now, the beginning part of this game, Milton McKenzie, their UCF's quarterback, was hurt. They had their backup in, thought it might make a difference. It seemed like it would in the beginning because Memphis actually led for quite a bit of this game. But UCF ended up winning, and they scored like 56 points. So it kind of seemed like it didn't matter who the quarterback was.
Oh, yeah.
But that's going to do it for Locked In and Upset Alert. So as I mentioned, Russell's at 75. I'm at 74. Jeremy's at 71. So, should we end it now with Russell winning? Absolutely not. We've got one game left. Army-Navy, Battle of the Commissioners Trophy, and that's going, or the Commander-in-Chief Trophy, rather, and that's going to be the only game this week.
They always set that one game out for them every
That one game. So, We are going to take picks at Army versus Navy, and it's worth 5 points. So
an entire list of traditional picks.
absolutely. So it all comes down to this. Who are you taking?
Well, I myself, I was in Richmond Senior High School, and I went to a JROTC program, and it's the Army branch. So I have to stick with Army every single year for this. So go Army, beat Navy.
Okay, so you're taking Army, which means I obviously have to take Navy. And I had already picked this before we sat down and did this. But here's the thing. Army and Navy run very similar offenses.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm interested to see. This is going to be an interesting game, period.
They always have a good game.
They both run this triple offense, which if you've never seen it before, you've got to check it out because there's so many different combinations of players going this way and that way and who hands it off to who. Half the time, the cameraman doesn't even know who's got the ball. But I think that's going to be very, very interesting because it's like, how do you prepare for a team that runs the same offense as you, but yet you very rarely see it?
Yeah, it's and they play this on neutral site too, Philadelphia. So I mean, it's going to be insane how this game goes. For me personally, I like this game more, not just for the game, but for the traditions that goes around it. So
Absolutely.
I just love the show they put on, and their uniforms
Yep.
are awesome.
They always go all out, some kind of military or patriotic theme.
Yeah, I think last year Navy went with the battleships and stuff like that. It was really cool.
But you've got pulled up that as far as the matchup predictor on ESPN, they've got Army as a 78% favorite. I didn't realize it was that different because Army has the better record, but again, this is a rivalry game.
And for the longest time, our Navy had been beating Army every single game. I think they went 14 games on a win streak, and then Army broke it just a couple of years ago. So Army is kind of fresh on their streak right now. So I think Army, while they still have the upper hand here, they don't count Navy out yet. They're a really tough team at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And not to leave Jeremy out, he's also taking the Navy midshipman, although
I don't think
I hate to tell him, but it's not going to make any difference because
he's playing for second place.
He's playing for second because if Army wins, that makes you that gives you 80 points.
Sole champion.
And then if I win, that gives me 79 to your 75. So if Navy wins, that would give Jeremy 76, but it wouldn't be enough. So it's basically down to you and I. Of course, we're here. We can battle it out. But You're taking Army. I'm taking Navy. Of course, we'll let you know next week how that turns out and whether you're victorious or whether I'm victorious.
Go Army.
And then
Navy.
finally, for this last week's picks, who you got for big man on campus?
Well, going back to the UCF's quarterback being injured, so now they had to bring in, I want to make sure I'm saying this right, Daryl Mack Jr.
I got it.
He's a freshman quarterback. He's
Yeah.
only had a couple of games this season, and he's always been second string. Most play time he has since being at second string was at ECU. But he played this game in the conference championship game against Memphis. Had a splendid game. 19 for 27, 348 yards. Overall, it was a great day and 2 touchdowns to add to it.
Yeah, and you hate to see a phenomenal player like Milton McKenzie get hurt, but, I mean, he came in and didn't skip a beat, it seems like. Scroll back down. Let's say he was 6'3", 230.
Yeah.
Whew, that's a hoss right there. My big man on campus for this week comes from the ACC. Clemson running back Travis Etienne, 12 carries, 156 yards, 2 touchdowns in their blowout of Pitt, as if it would go any other way. Real quick before we finish up here, UCF is playing LSU in the Fiesta Bowl. We just saw them last year whip another SEC West team in Auburn to say, hey, we're here. What do you think? Think they beat LSU?
I think they do.
All right. And I do want to mention, bowl season is coming up. I will tease it. We're not going to tell you quite yet what we're doing, but, of course, the RO Sports Show will have all of your bowl coverage. Maybe doing a little something special this year, though, and we'll give you details on that as we move forward.
There's 80 bowls, right?
There's 40 bowls.
40 bowls, okay.
40 bowls and 80 teams, though,
80, okay.
which is like 2/3 of the entire college football subdivision. Excuse me. But moving on, let's talk about the Heisman finalists. So they've narrowed it down to the top 3. Of course, they'll be making those picks tomorrow night at 8 p.m. I think it is up in New York. But no really surprise here. Tua Tagovailoa is one of the top vote getters. Kyler Murray from Oklahoma and Dwayne Haskins from Ohio State. So 3 quarterbacks, usually what you see when it comes to Heisman's.
Personally, I don't like that.
But you got to pull it up here. Kyler Murray is a junior. Tua and Haskins both sophomores. So want to take a stab? Who you think wins?
I as much as I like to see Tua win it, and as much as I think he deserves it, I just with his injury, I think that's going to play in a big factor when they go in to select this. And I'm probably going to go with Kyler Murray on this one. I
Okay.
think that he's just he's been playing so well all season. Multiple touchdowns, many
Yeah,
yards.
I think he's only got, I don't have the stats, I think he's only had 4 picks on the season with like 40 touchdowns
which
or
is
close to
phenomenal.
it. Yeah. Of course, all 3 of them have had great seasons. I'm going to stick with Dwayne Haskins. I've been talking about him being the Heisman winner for a couple of weeks now. He hasn't disappointed. I mean, I just mentioned he had 499 yards and like 5 touchdowns against Northwestern, a pretty decent Northwestern defense. Of course, we saw him shred up Michigan for 6 touchdowns. He's just been killing it all season long. So I'm going to stick with Haskins, although I do want to mention Kyler Murray perhaps winning the Heisman and then quitting football to go play for the Oakland A's. He's still planning on doing that.
That's
Does that
insane.
perplex you a little bit?
It does. 'Cause you got the one, you arguably the best college football player of the year going off to play baseball.
Yeah.
And it's insane that he's going to do
Yeah.
that.
And, usually I'd say, well, money-wise, it's probably a smart idea. But quarterbacks get paid as much as any sport, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't
And
know.
I say they even get more national recognition as well. So if you're going for that,
Yeah, maybe there's less of a chance of him getting hurt in baseball than
Yeah.
football, but still, I mean, if you're this good, it's not like he's a scrub. If you're the Heisman winner or just even getting invited to New York, maybe you should give it another year, you know?
yeah.
So anyway, last thing here before we finish up. So obviously the top 4 have been picked. Alabama 1, Clemson 2, Notre Dame 3. They're all undefeated. That didn't really surprise anybody. But of course, the question was who was going to be number 4, especially after Georgia lost to Alabama. Now, people thought it would either be Oklahoma, Ohio State, or even perhaps Georgia sneaking back in to be the first 2-loss team because they only lost by a few points. And that was something we discussed last week. But as we know now, Oklahoma slides into the 4th spot at 12-1. So any observations?
Yeah, so going into this, I just want to say what I'm about to say is my own opinion, and I think that Notre Dame shouldn't be in it.
Okay, why
But I think they are one of the best teams that should be in, if that makes sense.
not? No, that doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. I don't think it should be because they don't have a conference that they play in.
Okay.
But they are one of the best teams of the season, so fine. But they should be number 4, I think. Oklahoma, I think they got it in right. I think that makes sense. Georgia, yes, they're a great team, but they lost a game that they probably should have won. And they led the entire game, they couldn't finish it out. So, and yes, they play the best team in the nation, number 1. So I think still not getting it done. I just don't really think Georgia has a case any longer.
I get the argument you're trying to make about Notre Dame, and you and I have had a discussion where Notre Dame is independent in football. So is BYU. And I remember bringing a point to you. I said, I wonder if BYU went undefeated, if they would get the same kind of love that
wouldn't.
Notre Dame would. And I don't think they would either. So, yes, Notre Dame is a blue blood. Yes, they get some consideration that other teams wouldn't necessarily get. But it's kind of like, look, as long as Notre Dame goes undefeated, they're guaranteed to get in. And that's exactly what we saw this year. Let me ask you a question about this. Georgia drops to 5th. At 11-2, Ohio State 12-1 won the Big Ten and is still behind Georgia. You think that's fair?
I don't think it's fair either. I also think that Georgia should be down to 6. I think conference championship wins
It should
over
matter.
a championship loss definitely matters. Not only that, Ohio State is a 12-1 team. Georgia is now a 11-2 now. So I really don't think it makes sense for them to be above Ohio State in this case, regardless of who they lost to.
Yep.
But I guess it is what it is.
Which, by the way, something that you and I have ranted about all year long. You take a look at the CFP. They have Georgia 5, Ohio State 6. Take a look at the AP, and more importantly to me, the coaches poll. They both have Ohio State in front of Georgia.
Yep.
So I don't know. Maybe there's still some tweaking that needs to be done with the college football playoff. Not exactly sure what that is. It's still better than the BCS, but
And I'm gonna go ahead and shout out UCF because they went undefeated once again, and they're barely inside of the top 10. That's absolutely disgusting in my opinion. I think that they should even jump Georgia at that point.
Well, I don't know about that, but yeah.
I just think that they should definitely have a case. I mean, what do they have to do now at this point to get in? They've done undefeated 2 seasons in a row. They defeated the SEC team in the bowl game last year. They came in and won their conference championship, while one team doesn't have a conference and the other one lost theirs.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. You and I have both been on the UCF bandwagon all season. I mean, you hit it on the head. I don't know what else they can do to prove to the CFP, even though, I mean, obviously it comes down to them not being in a Power 5. It's as simple as that. Now, I think you and I can agree, is that fair? No, but it's the landscape that we live in. But if UCF is able to beat LSU, I mean, going into next year, it's like, look, what do they have to do? Win 3 straight years in a row going undefeated? I mean,
and you know, if they
what's
lose
the limit?
one, if they lose one, they'll drop 20 spots.
Yeah, they'll get hit like a ton of bricks.
Yep.
And, you know, it's a very thin line for them, more so than some of these other teams, like Georgia, who's now at 5 with 2 losses. So a lot still needs to be hashed out, I think, as far as how they figure this out. Perhaps it's adding 2 more teams, maybe adding 4 more. I don't know that we'll
Make
see
it
that.
an 18 playoff.
Don't know that we'll see that anytime soon, but I believe that, look, you see a playoff scenario extended at every level except for this level in football. So, I don't know. Perhaps
And
they'll
if
figure
we
it
had
out.
an 18 playoff, you have Alabama versus UCF right now. And yes, UCF probably will get flat out shut down in that game. But
Maybe, but, you know.
they still deserve it. I think they deserve the opportunity to show, you know, if they're playoff material or not.
Absolutely. So, this is our plea to the CFP. Show you at UCF some love.
No, not a plea, a demand.
A demand. An RO Sports Show demand. Well, that's going to do it for the RO Sports Show special college football frenzy. As I mentioned earlier, teased a little bit, bowl season is upon us. I think the first game is on Saturday, December 15th. So we're going to have something special for you as far as the bowl season is concerned. In the meantime, I guess we're going to get ready for Army-Navy. Hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. For Russell Parker, I'm Matt Harrelson. We'll see you next week.